Welcome to Martha's Vineyard and the Martha's Vineyard Book Festival. We're so glad you're here. We're so honored. Ted and I are honored to be any part of this wonderful book. We both read it with such pleasure.
We actually bought 2 copies because we're not good at sharing stuff.
Yeah.
And we loved it, really. We devoured it. It's an amazing book. Happy to be talking about it. But before we get started, I just, if you don't mind, we were a little uncertain how to address you.
Yeah.
You have so many...
You've just had so many nicknames over the years.
Yeah.
Gretch.
Stretchen, Gretchen.
Fetchin, Gretchen.
Big Gretch.
That woman from Michigan.
Half-wit.
Governor Half-Wit. So
Right,
we were
right.
wondering, which do you prefer? Yeah.
Well, I talk a lot in my book about my 2 grandmothers, Gretchen and Esther. That's my name, Gretchen Esther Whitmer. I'm named after these 2 phenomenal grandmothers. And Grandma Gretchen always said, never let anyone call you Gretch. Your name is Gretchen. And I don't know many people, women in particular, who want big in the front of their nickname, right? But my new favorite nickname is Big Gretch because it was bestowed on me by the people of Detroit in the midst of the pandemic when the former president was singling me out and stoking violent rhetoric, and I was getting a lot of threats. The people of Detroit started calling me Big Gretch, and I'll be honest, when I first heard it, I was not sure if it was a compliment or not. And I talk a little bit in the book about how a woman on my staff named Shaquila Myers, who was from Detroit, said, "Oh no, you don't understand, Governor. This is a compliment. This is like getting the key to the city in Detroit. The people have accepted you." And so my new favorite nickname is Big Gretch, but you can call me Gretchen.
All right.
Or Big Gretch, whatever you're comfortable with.
You talk about the phrase, do the next right thing, and yes, that is a lyric from a song in Frozen 2. But why was publishing this book in an election year the next right thing to do?
Well, here's what I get asked the most when I'm traveling around Michigan or even outside of the state of Michigan. The question I get the most is, how do you stay positive when everything feels so heavy? In my first term, I was governor through obviously the pandemic. We had a polar vortex 3 weeks into the term, which we had to navigate. We had demonstrations for racial justice in the wake of George Floyd's murder. We had a historic flooding event that washed out a dam and meant we had to evacuate 10,000 people in the middle of the night in the middle of a pandemic. I survived 28 recall attempts. Most people don't know that, but I was counting. And a plot to kidnap and kill me. And so people ask a logical question, which is, why do you want to keep doing this? And how do you still stay positive and optimistic? And I thought, if there's something I can put out in this year, knowing that it was going to be another heavy election year where the rhetoric would be hot and it would be divisive, I wanted to put something positive out. And so the book really is kind of 10 things I've learned at a point in my life that I've used to get through these last 6 years. And I share some things that I hadn't shared publicly to get a laugh. So if you get a laugh at my expense, that's great. If there's a lesson that I learned and that I used that helped me, that might help you, fantastic. And if it's just a little light reading while you're on the beach in a heavy election year, then I've achieved my goal. But just to put some light out into the world in a heavy time, I think is really important. As I talk to people, I know everyone feels exhausted, and the heat of all the political rhetoric and how heavy this has felt in terms of individual rights and attacks on our institutions of democracy, et cetera. It is hard, and we've got to keep going. And so encouraging and supporting one another, that's what this is all about.
It does it. It does it.
Can we talk a minute about your family? Because it's so clear how important your family was to you growing up and later in life, being governor. And we had the pleasure of meeting your sister backstage. And one of the phrases that stuck in my mind was that the Whitmer family does not hold grudges, and they have thick skins. Can you talk a little bit about where that came from in your life? Parents, grandparents, where?
Yeah, so I often feel like I have benefited from coming from this family where they have good senses of humor. We don't take things personally, and we have a terrible memories. So thick skin and a short memory, I think, are great assets in politics. The worst kind of politician is someone with thin skin and a long memory. They're out for retribution and run on grievance, right? Maybe some people come to mind when I say that, I don't know. But growing up in our family, I think that was really a tremendous asset to be able to move forward. There's a part in the book where I talk about how you never regret being kind. And whether it's my grandma Esther, who I called Nino when I was a little kid, she always said you can find something good about every person. Even the meanest person in the world might have pretty eyes, and always try to refocus to find the good in any situation. And that's something I carry with me. I keep a gratitude journal, and at the end of every day I write down 3 things that I'm grateful for. You all will be on it in today when I close out my list today. But you never regret being kind. I often think about, I was at a workout facility in Lansing, Michigan, and it was after my first campaign, and there was a man who looked very familiar, and my default when I can't come up with someone's name or place them right away is just to be overly friendly, so I threw my arms around him and said, "It's so good to see you," and then I walked away and realized he was the architect of the campaign against me. And I just hugged the enemy, because I couldn't remember, but I often thought about that because I would so much rather hug someone I didn't mean to, be kind to someone that, if I'd have thought about it, maybe wouldn't have been my default, than to be unkind to someone that I had meant to be. So you never regret being kind is something that I think goes along with that thick skin and a short memory. Every one of us is a flawed human being, and when you read the book, you'll get to see some of my flaws laid bare. But I do think that at the end of the day, if we can try to see the humanity in one another and find something good, it'll help us get through tough times or help us solve problems. I've had to sit across the table and negotiate with people who shared a stage with the folks that were convicted of wanting to plot, wanting to kidnap and kill me. And I still had to negotiate with my legislature who shared a stage with them. So you can't take things personally, and it's sometimes challenging to do so, but I think you get a lot more done if you don't care about credit and you don't take the slights personally.
Talk about your grandfather for a second. Wasn't he involved? Was he a superintendent of schools in Michigan during a very difficult time, busing, right?
Yeah. So my grandfather, Dana Whitmer, was the superintendent of Pontiac schools in 1971. It was the year that I was born, and that was when the federal court in Detroit ordered integration through busing. And my grandfather was kind of in the middle of it because it all stemmed from the Pontiac school district. This is a suburb of Detroit. At the time was very well populated, lots of auto workers, middle class, community. And there was a lot of racial strife. There was this order to start busing kids so that the schools could be integrated. And my grandfather was in the middle of it. His job was to make sure that students were getting the education that they needed, but he had to deal with white parents who were angry about integration, had to work with, students who were coming into a new district and simply needed and wanted an education. And I had never really thought about some of the similarities of what I've had to lead through and what he had to lead through at the time. The Ku Klux Klan in Michigan was based in Howell, which was about 35 miles west of Pontiac. And they threatened to kill my grandfather, to bomb the house. My grandmother got calls late at night saying, "Do you know where your husband is? He's not coming home tonight." They bombed 10 buses in Pontiac. It made national news. It was on Time magazine at the time. And Dana Whitmer was a person who the community ended up naming a building after because they called him the Silver Fox. He had a beautiful white hair, kind of like you do. And he was cool as a cucumber throughout all the chaos and the ugliness and the threats that came his way. And I share that story at the end of the book because he is as well a part of the family from which I come. He had Alzheimer's early on in my life, so I never got to know him as well as I would have loved to. But I'm honored to think about his experience and think maybe some of that somehow helped me get through what I've had to navigate.
Well, we love stories about grandparents being important to people because we have three
We're
and
important
one, and
people,
one on the
Edward.
way. So,
Yeah.
and they are everything to us. So we appreciate that. And how you became that woman from Michigan, that strange, weird time that led to that.
So there's one of the chapters in the book is dealing with bullies. And every one of us has probably dealt with someone who was trying to intimidate us or to make us fearful. All the nicknames that I've had, that woman from Michigan was one that was the most unexpected, frankly. In the early days of COVID, and I know none of us wants to relive that, but it bears worth kind of refreshing our recollection. In the early days of COVID, Detroit, New Orleans, Chicago, and New York City were all really hit hard by COVID in the early days. We were the first big cities to really see just massive numbers of cases and deaths, and it was in the early days when we really knew very little about the virus. We would frequently have calls with the White House, the Trump White House, and we were desperately trying to get masks and gloves just for our doctors and nurses who were caring for patients. And I had gone on one of our calls with all of the governors and the White House, and I'll never forget, the president at the time said to us, "I'm not the nation's shipping clerk. You're going to have to go find those things on your own." And I remember just being really fearful at that time because I had doctors and nurses that were wearing masks for days, weeks on end to try to treat patients and stay safe themselves, and realized we've got to set up a global procurement office in the middle of this pandemic just to try to find these implements. And so one of the things that I was doing was going on the national news asking for help. And in one of those interviews, I observed that there was no federal national strategy to help states get through this. And Donald Trump did not like that. He actually got really angry about it and started singling me out for criticism and name calling. It was, I think, one of those evenings in the middle of the pandemic when I wasn't sleeping a whole lot anyway, that he had done a press conference and he said, with Mike Pence standing next to him, "If they don't treat you right, I say don't call them back." And this is what he was saying to the press. "Mike, don't call them back. Don't call that woman from Michigan back. Don't call that guy, Jay Inslee from Washington State back." And so that woman from Michigan became the attack line, the dismissive way that he referred to me. And I wasn't upset because it hurt my feelings or I cared about him calling me a name. I was worried he would be, cruel and withhold help from the state of Michigan. I was worried because we had so many people that were dying from COVID, and I was already struggling to get the things that we needed to keep people safe. And so when he did that, and then I realized, okay, he's not going to stop me. We're going to keep going. We're going to be able to do this. We're going to get through it. I decided, I'm going to take his weapon, this name calling, and I'm going to use it as my shield. I think the best way to deal with a bully is to either laugh at them or to just take their weapon from them and use it as your shield, like call to action. And so I went on Trevor Noah's program, and we were talking about the situation in Michigan. I was asking for help, but I also wore a T-shirt that said "That woman from Michigan" under my jacket. And lo and behold, people started showing up at events with that woman from Michigan jacket, or stickers on their cars. One woman showed up, she'd done a drawing of me, a cartoon of me, and it said, "That woman from Michigan." And then she proudly turned around and showed me, she had it tattooed on the back of her calf muscle. And the mom in me was like, "Oh dear, I hope you don't, regret that one day." But, so that was, I think, the tactic to deal with the biggest bully, I think, on the planet right? The leader of the free world in the middle of a national and international crisis, was just to try to pull people together and not let it distract me and not let it get under my skin, but to have a laugh at it and then just to keep going.
Did you notice shortly after that, when the president said that threats started to tick up? Was there a direct correlation?
Yeah, so going into the pandemic, we knew that once we identified our first cases, we started to ask people to scale back, and we created the stay-at-home order as well. And my legislature, it was Republican-controlled at the time, overwhelmingly Republican-controlled. They were working pretty well with me. But as soon as the former president targeted me, it changed everything on the ground in Michigan. My legislature turned against me and started suing me, trying to take away my powers that I was using to keep people safe. They were waging all sorts of lawsuits and starting to get people riled up and demonstrating. There was a big protest outside of Michigan's capital. When January 6th happened, I think the only state that wasn't surprised to watch that was the state of Michigan, because we had some similar things happen many months before January 6th. There was a Operation Gridlock, they called it, and this was an effort to encourage people who were unhappy about me asking them to stay home to come downtown and drive their cars and trucks downtown and to come to make everything to a standstill. And I was in the office that day, and I was giving regular updates to the people of Michigan, like governors were all across the country, what the case numbers were, how to stay safe, what we knew of the best practices were at the time, trying to allay fears but help people to stay safe. And so I was in my office to give that press conference. And the governor's office, most of those people didn't know, thankfully, that the governor's office isn't actually in the state capitol. It's across the street in a building called the Romney Building. I know, shh, Danson, shh, don't tell them now. Well, if they read the book, they'll figure it out. So, but I was in my office, and I looked out to see, because you could just hear the noise, the honking, the screaming, the bullhorns. And I looked out, and I was so shocked to see people protesting with Confederate flags. Michigan is as north as you can go in this country, and we were on the Union side. They had signs, they had swastikas and Nazi, symbolism, and a sign that said Heil Whitmer. There were people that were carrying a Barbie, a dark-haired Barbie hanging from a noose. And I took a picture with my phone that day because there was a truck, and it's in the book, but they had a big sign on the back of their truck that said, half-wit, which is another slight that Donald Trump sent my way, is the reason we need the Second Amendment. And when you saw the long guns out there, I think that's when it kind of took my breath away, that what is happening here? Weeks after that, we had the armed protests inside our Capitol that garnered national news, and then the plot to kidnap and kill me. But every time the former president mentioned Michigan on Twitter, much less me specifically, we saw the threats go up. We saw the rhetoric get hotter. We saw more people show up in front of the governor's residence with their long guns and with their children in tow as well, and their bullhorns yelling, and a big Trump float outside of the residence, making racket and yelling horrible things at the residence. And I think it was one of those moments where I just, thought, what is happening here? I don't understand. I'm doing the same thing so many other governors are doing. And this is the reaction that I'm getting in my state, where I'm just trying to keep people safe, and they're threatening to take my life and making threats against my family too. And, I was really dismayed to see the shooting in Pennsylvania a few weeks ago and Donald Trump's rally. And we must condemn violence and political rhetoric, no matter who it's against. But I also know, I also know that the threats against my family and me were stoked by a lot of those same rallies years ago. And while I welcome the Speaker of the House to the conversation to say, let's bring down the temperature, I've been saying that for 3 years. And so people of goodwill have to hold one another accountable. And it can't just be when it's against you as opposed to against your political enemy.
Can I ask one more question? I mean, this could probably come later, but talking about family, it must have hit hard your children and your husband. Was your mother still alive? Forgive me, I can't remember. But your family, how did you deal with making them feel safe or talking about it? Or it must have been so hard.
Yeah, you know, in retrospect, I probably should have put some more thought into it, to be honest. My husband is a dentist, and he doesn't have the same security detail that I do. His office is not far from the Capitol, just a few blocks away. And the threats that I was getting started spilling over to his dental practice. He was going to practice for another 8 years and ultimately decided just to retire because he was really worried, not about his safety, but about his staff and his patients. Someone could walk in and, you know, who knows what. And so he decided to retire, and that was hard. He's very happy now. All he does is play the guitar and hang out with our dogs. So he's living his best life now, but it was a big sacrifice. Those are the 8, most lucrative earning years of his practice that he forewent, and so he's made a big sacrifice. My children, fortunately, have their dad's last name, so I had always wished I'd given them Whitmer as their middle name, so we were attached. And now I'm so glad I didn't give them Whitmer as their middle name. They're, one just graduated from college and the other is going into her senior year. They're very much like me. We're kind of stoic Midwesterners, and I shared with them that, the day that all those people showed up on the front lawn, the first time they showed up with the guns and making all the racket, they came out of their rooms and they said, "What's going on?" And we all kind of crowded into the little public bathroom at the governor's residence, because that's the one window you can see to the front. And we were shocked to see what was happening on the front lawn, and they were a little rattled. But I just shared with them, this is happening, and we're going to be okay, and we've got the state police, and you don't need to worry. And we didn't talk about it a whole lot beyond that. When I had to tell them about the plot, I had been read in by the state police and the FBI who had infiltrated the plot, and so I knew a couple months before it became public. About a week before it became public, I let my kids and my husband know what was going on, and they were really surprised. And the plotters had spent weeks, 14 people spending weeks plotting to kidnap a sitting governor, went up to our summer place up north and staked it out and had, intricate plans about how they were going to foil the police and bomb bridges and put me on a sham trial and then execute me. And when I shared, all of that with my children, they never got scared, I think, for their own safety, but they haven't been back to our place up north. And I don't know if they will, because I think that represents real trauma. Yeah.
Wow, well, your courage, I keep jumping in, sorry, but
you really
your
do.
courage, I know. You know why? Because we rehearsed who would ask what, and I blew it. And I didn't ask my second question, and you had to ask it for me, and I do
all right,
appreciate
Chad.
that. Enough about me.
No, I think one of the things that's so miraculous about this story is that your reaction to all of this has not been to lash back in hate, to walk away from your job, to walk away from, you have a chapter in here called Run Toward the Fire. I think you do that, you know. Yeah. And I just think that, you know, I think about my dad a lot, because my dad was a freight train conductor in Arkansas. He didn't consider himself a political person at all, but he you know, always said things like, I know a good man when I see one, and, you know, that's a good person over there. And, like, being a good person was, like, everything to him. And whether it was someone that was a politician that he saw on television or just someone he knew. And he died a long time ago. He died in 1989. And when I always go through public events thinking about what would he be feeling right now? You know, would he even believe this? This is so weird and so not the world he taught me to be a part of. And I very much want it not to go backwards, but to go forward in grace, you know. And one of the things I loved about this book is there was so much grace in it. And I think that's a hard thing to find in a job like yours and in a moment like this. And I appreciated it so much. You and I both love music. You have the True Gretch playlist in here. There is a theme, if you really listen to it in a way. Not Ready to Make Nice, the Chicks. Don't Stop Me Now, Queen. The Man, Taylor Swift. Welcome to the Jungle, Guns N' Roses. Seven Nation Army, the White Stripes. 9 to 5, Dolly Parton. Think, Aretha Franklin. Born This Way, Lady Gaga. I'm Still Standing, Elton John. The Fixer, Pearl Jam. Wrecking Ball, Miley Cyrus. And Let's Go Crazy, Prince and the Revolution. And I feel like you're telling us something through music. I feel like you're kind of telling us that you have figured out ways to deal with bullies, and I think it's a useful book. I mean, in a world with so much meanness online, you know, I talked to my granddaughters. We were talking about you, and I didn't tell them everything because they're young, and I didn't want to, you know, burst all their bubbles, but we talked about that sometimes people are bullies and that you figured out good ways to deal with them. Is it kind of, how's your heart? How's that going?
You know, I am really lucky. I really believe that. One of the things I started the book off with is my father said to a reporter, one of my very first campaign was in the year 2000, so the year of the hanging Chad. I ran for the State House of Representatives in Michigan.
And you were how old? 29?
28.
28.
Yeah, 28, going on 29, yeah.
Wow.
And someone interviewed my dad, and they said, you know, tell us about Gretchen, whatever. And my dad said, well, Gretchen knows she's not special. And to see that in print, I know how people were like, wow, her dad's not very supportive, but it really what he meant was he raised us to recognize that no one's inherently more special than anyone else. No one is inherently worth more or more important. That we recognize that, and where you have opportunities and advantages, it also comes with responsibility to use those opportunities and advantages to help those who don't have them. And I think that was always something that, you know, is a part of how he raised us. I love how you were talking about your dad. Okay, but what was your question?
Well, how you're surviving inside.
Oh, how's my heart?
Yeah.
Yes. So, you know, I feel really fortunate. I know that I am not, you know, special. I am an ordinary person. I have an extraordinary job, and I have served in extraordinary times. But I am an ordinary person, and I feel really lucky to have the opportunities that I do and the family that I do and my dogs who are always there to greet me with joy even when someone else in the household doesn't feel like it. They do.
Kevin and Doug.
Kevin and Doug, my dogs. But, I do think that it's important to be checking in. Some of the things, some of the transitions in my life, I've sought counseling over the years to get some perspective. I love to do that. I think it's a great thing. Mm-hmm. And one of the brilliant people that I saw for a little while, she was this Israeli woman in Michigan who would tell me that every one of us is like a ball of clay. And sometimes things are taken away from us. And it's not fair, but they're taken away from us. And we were talking specifically about my early years. When I was 6 years old, my folks got divorced. And it's a chapter about learning to listen. And I was in second grade. There's a lot of stress at home. I'm the oldest. My sister is 18 months younger. She was in kindergarten. My brother is 4 years younger than she, so he was an infant during this time. And we would walk to school together. But then I would fall apart around lunch. I was just really struggling. And my teacher, Mrs. Bowie, sat down with me, second grade Gretchen, and said, she wanted to understand what was happening with me. And she learned that I was really worried about my sister being able to walk home alone. That's what was going on with me. I was feeling responsible for her, and I'd taken on more responsibility because my parents weren't communicating very well, and so I had a lot on my shoulders at the time. And so my teacher arranged for me to walk my sister home so I could see she'd be safe, and from then on it was much better. And that chapter's all about learning to listen. But I share this with you because I was talking about this part of my life with this counselor at one point, and she was telling me we're all a ball of clay, and you were a child, you should have been able to have a carefree childhood, but you couldn't because you had added responsibilities. And she said, and sometimes things are taken away from you, like that carefree childhood. But what you have is purpose. So a ball of clay becomes a vessel, a cup that can carry something. And that which is taken away ultimately is what gives you purpose. And I've always loved that vision because it helps me understand that that's part of why I'm the caregiver that I am, why I do public service, why I want to make people's lives better and help people. It is part of why, as a sexual assault survivor, I know that I now have a voice, and the fact that I'm comfortable using it means I should be using it. Not every survivor is, and that's okay, but I am, and that gives me purpose. And so I feel like I'm really lucky to have the supports that I have and the opportunities that I've had. And despite the hardships, I can see purpose in them.
I get it. Yeah. You do seem to love music, but there's one song, despite it being hauntingly beautiful, that's hard for you to hear, which is Sinead O'Connor's Nothing Compares to You. And you just referenced a sexual assault, and you write about it in the chapter Never Give Up. Can you share a little of that with us?
Yeah. So in 20, let's see, I'll go way back. In my freshman year in college, I was sexually assaulted. And it was someone that I knew, and it was a time when women were not comfortable, and I'm not suggesting women are comfortable, but it's more, I think it's, we've come and we've made the world a little bit better. We got a lot of work yet to do, but we've made it a little bit better for survivors of sexual assault to know where to get help, to raise their voices, to hear other voices that are being raised. And it was very different back when I was a freshman in college. It was a really hard time, and Nothing Compares to You was the song that was most popular at the time. I mean, it was on the radio, and of course we listened to the radio back then. We didn't all have our playlists and our iPods, et cetera, but it was a really tough time, and I didn't tell many people that I had been assaulted. A couple of partners over the years, but I hadn't shared it with my family, my mom, my dad, my sister even. I kept it very close because I had lots of really difficult feelings about it. Guilt, embarrassment, shame, all of the things that survivors often feel. So I never had shared it. And fast forward to 2013, I was in the Michigan State Senate. I was the leader of the Senate Democrats, the first woman to lead a caucus in the Michigan Senate. We had a caucus of 12 people out of a body of 38. So we were in a slim minority. Just for perspective, there were more men named John than women in the Senate at that time. There's an even spicier joke I could tell, but I'm not going to, about Johns in the Senate. But they had a bill that my predecessor, Republican Governor Rick Snyder, had vetoed. This was a bill to require that to have abortion care, you would have to pre-purchase an abortion rider with your insurance. So you would have to pre-plan for an unplanned event by buying a rider that's not available in the marketplace. It was just another flat-out barrier. And they didn't have so they went around the former governor. He vetoed it, but then they went out and got signatures. And in Michigan, if you get a certain threshold of signatures, you can bypass the governor altogether. So it just comes before the legislature, and a simple majority vote can change the law, and the governor can't stop it. And so they had done this, and the bill was in front of us. They didn't hold a single committee hearing where women could testify or medical professionals could testify. And I knew that our only chance to make an argument was going to be in that floor fight. And I had asked one of my colleagues, a man named Jim, he and his wife desperately were trying to have kids. They'd gone through IVF a number of times. She'd recently had a miscarriage, but it didn't complete, and she needed to go to the hospital for abortion care. We've done ourselves a huge disservice by calling it different things in different circumstances. DNC is abortion care. And I asked him if he could tell the story, because I thought maybe that story would be compelling with some folks on the other side. And I asked him to tell it, and it was too recent, and he just couldn't. He didn't feel like he could tell it. And I was walking back to my desk, and I thought, how can I ask him to bare his soul when I have a story that maybe might impact the vote? And so at the last minute, I decided to share that I had been raped when I was in college. I wanted them to see the face of women who were going to be impacted. And I said, thankfully, I wasn't impregnated by my attacker, but I don't know how I would have gotten through it if I had been. And I shared that heaviest and most personal of stories, and it didn't change a single vote that day. After the vote, to make matters worse, one of my colleagues from the other side of the aisle came over and said, my wife, too, was raped when she was in college, and I wish I could have voted with you. Which just was not the thing I needed to hear at that moment. On my way home, I had to call my dad to let him know, because I knew this was going to be in the news, and he didn't know that this had happened. And so I got home, I was feeling so depressed. I woke up the next morning just feeling very blue, and by the time I got to my office in the Capitol, hundreds of people had reached out overnight to say, this is a story I can relate to, or thank you for sharing your story. And so even though I lost that vote, I felt like it had purpose. And 10 years later, as governor of the state of Michigan, in 2022, I won by 11 points, and we flipped the House and the Senate in Michigan for the first time in 40 years. Ten years to the day, I signed the repeal of that stupid bill. So I'm proud of that. So that's why that chapter is called Never Give Up. It was a 10-year fight, but we won. And these fights are worth having because we can win them.
Amen.
You've already talked about or used the phrase, the gift of listening. Will you tell the story? I'd love it almost became a slogan for all of you, fix the damn roads.
Yeah. Yes. So I'm known for my first campaign slogan, fix the damn roads. It wasn't something that I poll tested or came up with on my own. In Michigan in 2016, Donald Trump carried Michigan by 11,000 votes. It was so close. And I remember waking up the next morning and my daughters looking at me because they knew how hard I'd worked on that campaign for Hillary Clinton and how devastated I was, when we went to bed the night before, and they said, "Are we going to be okay?" And it's when I'd already been planning to run for governor. What inspired me was really the Flint water crisis had become known, and I wanted to run so that I could fix it for the people of Flint. And after that election, I thought, I got to get out and get all across the state and understand what's going on, because that was such a surprise outcome to me that Trump had carried Michigan. I thought, I can't neglect any part of the state. I've got to go, and I got into all 83 counties. Along the way, I would often ask people, if I'm fortunate enough to get elected, what could I do that'll make your life better? And over again, from Detroit to the Upper Peninsula and everywhere in between, people would say, fix the damn roads. That's how people talked about it over and over again. Never poll tested it. I just started talking the way everyone else was talking about it. We put it on the buses and everything. But it was really a conversation that I didn't expect that, for me, crystallized what it was really all about. I was in the Detroit Children's Hospital, and as a politician, you go into places where you're not necessarily invited, and you have to try to have conversations, and it can be awkward and uncomfortable at times. And I'm in a hospital for children, but I came across this room where there were some kids and their parents, and I chatted with a very friendly-looking woman, and I said, my name's Gretchen Whitmer, I'm running for governor, and if I'm elected, is there anything I could do that would make your life better? And she looked me in the eye and said, fix the damn roads. And I was surprised. So I'm like, I got to understand a little bit more. What is really going on here? And so I said, why is that the first thing that you say? Because I thought we were going to talk about healthcare or education or childcare or something. And she explained that she lived in Flint, north of Detroit, long drive down to Detroit every day to see her son and back. 2 other sons at home in Flint, and she was doing that round trip every day. And she had a pothole that absolutely destroyed the rim on her wheel. And she was sidelined for a whole day. It cost hundreds of dollars to get her car back on the road. She missed the whole day with her son, who was in the hospital, had to pay for childcare for the other 2 who were home in Flint, and it was just devastating. It was money out of rent, it was money out of childcare. And so that's when Fix the Damn Roads took on the meaning for me that it did. When people who are struggling, when the fundamentals don't work, that's who pays the biggest price. Many people can drive their second car. If the water coming out of your tap isn't clean enough, many people can go out and buy bottled water. When the education system isn't giving your kid all the support they need, you can hire a tutor or move districts. But for people who are struggling, they don't have any of those options, and they pay the dearest price. And that's why Fix the Damn Roads became this call to action. Now, the funny part of that story is it's in a chapter called Learning to Listen. And Bridget Bonds, who is the mom I'm telling you about, is a very devoted Christian lady, and she does not agree that she said damn in that conversation, which is kind of funny because the whole thing's about listening. So even I get it wrong on occasion.
This is a pretty salty crowd, so I think you can tell the Shark Week story, would you please?
Okay. Buckle up, because I'm going to use some colorful language, my friends. When I was first running for governor in 2018, Emily's List was a great asset and ally to me. And they sent me a debate coach to help me get ready for my big debate for governor. I'd run for and held many offices, but I'd never had anything this high profile. And so I thought, I'm always eager to learn more. How can I be a better communicator? And so Emily's List, ironically, sent a man to come and tell me how to debate, which was funny. But he gave me a lot of great tips. But one of the things that he said, and I think it's really incredibly wise, is the happy warrior wins every debate. If you can turn off the volume and look in who looks like they're having the most fun, generally that's the person who's winning the debate. And so you want to cultivate the happy warrior. So he'd say, when you go to your podium, there's always blank papers and a pen. Go and put a big smiley face at the top of your blank pages. And remember to smile. Now, any woman who's been told to smile knows. It has the opposite effect. It's irritating for a man to tell you to smile, right? Or anyone to tell you to smile. And so I'm like, I'm not going to put a smiley face, but I need to find something that keeps me loose and makes me laugh a little bit. And so I'd gone to a comedy show. Kevin Hart had a show in downtown Detroit, and he had a couple people who opened for him, and one was a comedian named Naeem Lynn. And he was talking about how women are so much more empowered today than they were back in the day. And his example is around menstruation. He'd say, back in the day, if you wanted to see your girlfriend and it was that time of the month, she would be very demure and not, come right out and tell you, no, it's that time of the month. She would say, oh, Aunt Flo is in town, or something, something like that. He said, women today are empowered. It's different. You want to go see your girlfriend and it's that time of the month, hey, I want to come over and see you. And she'll say, no, you're not coming over because it's Shark Week, motherfucker. And I thought that was so funny. So I put SW, MF on the top of my notes. And in the microphone test, we each had 10 people we could bring. He had all the buttoned up, conservative people, the head of the state chamber, et cetera. And I had, family and friends who all knew the story. And so when we were testing our mics, he said, this is Bill Shooty on duty. That was his phrase. And they said, how about you? And so I tested, I said, I'm Gretchen Whitmer, welcome to Shark Week. And everyone on my side started laughing because they knew why I said it. Everyone on his side thought I'd lost my mind. They were laughing. And I think I might have won the debate before we started because he was so confused what was going on. But so this has been our way to keep me loose before every big speech. I just write SWMF at the top or whatever. And before I spoke at the last Democratic National Convention, which was virtual because we're in the midst of the pandemic, I gave my talk from a labor hall in Lansing, Michigan. And I had practiced and put a lot of work into the speech. But right before we went live, my communications director said, don't forget, it's Shark Week, Governor. And I said, oh, it's not just Shark Week, it's Shark Week. And then I mouthed. I didn't say it. But the DNC, someone at the DNC let that footage get out. I was so crushed the next morning when I found out that this was what was trending, because I thought I gave this great speech and that's what people are going to remember. And yet, people started embracing it and showing up in the t-shirts, and they made candles and cups, and so it's been kind of our funny call to action.
My favorite story. Are you okay if we start taking questions from the audience?
Yes. Are we doing good, Sue Ellen? Okay.
Here's one. How do you approach using storytelling, especially when talking to people who don't share your views? Well, that was kind of an example of it, but...
I think, listening and engaging with people is a superpower that too few people cultivate today, especially in politics. The listening tours that I've done, whether it was around reproductive rights or it was around just trying to find common ground, I think has been so valuable to me that when I can talk about sitting across from a Republican who shows up and has concerns about, whether reproductive freedom or what's happening in our dialogue, we can really start to see the humanity in one another. And when I can tell you Bridget Bond's story, right, you see that the work that we're doing, the things that we're focused on, really, at the end of the day, is all about people. And every one of us is a person who wants better for our families and for our futures. And so listening and using other people's stories to educate, I think, helps make it more personal for people. And that's how I deploy storytelling. And that's when I learn the most, is when I keep my mouth shut and ask questions so I can learn.
Great. Another one. How can public officials and politicians on the campaign trail more effectively use social media?
Well, I'm really proud. I've got a fabulous young team. I'm always having young people come up and say, your TikTok game is the best. And I just say thank you, but the truth is, I don't even know what the password is. I've got phenomenal people on my team who know a lot more about certain things than I know, and I trust them. And so when they have me do certain things on TikTok, for instance, the nickname Big Gretch, when Barbie came out, they pitched me on the idea, let's take the America Ferrera Barbie and cut her hair like mine, put her in a pink suit like the one I wore on election night, and put her in a GM-made pink Corvette, and talk about our budget. And so, Little Gretch, we call her, educated people about the Michigan budget. Something that is really not that interesting to young people, but cut through all the noise. And so we've really, I think, trust my young team to combine what's happening in social media and what's current with the important policy work that we're doing is the way that we've married those two things. And just brag that I think we've got the best social media game of any governor in the country is not that big a brag, but I do think it's true.
With the seemingly backwards movement regarding women, how do we stay positive and keep fighting?
Well, the story that I tell about that 10-year battle to get that horrible bill off, that horrible statute off the books, I tell that because I want people to know these moments are hard. It is terribly distressing to think my kids might have fewer rights than I've had my whole life as an American woman, and yet it's important to share those stories and to remember that we can change what's happening. We can change the trajectory. It might not be fast, it might not be overnight. We didn't get here overnight, but it is possible. The only sure thing is that we won't if we disengage. And I understand the desire to want to check out, but checking in is the way that we make the change. And it makes you feel better when you see so many people feel the same way. We are in the majority, and we need to check in and do the work, and we will be successful.
I think you may have just answered this one, but do you envision a time in your lifetime where politics won't be so full of hatred and division?
I do. I wouldn't still be doing this if I thought that it was just going to be a foreseeable downward trajectory. But it's not going to happen overnight. This is an important election that we are on the cusp of, and I do believe that we will see a stark choice in front of us. We already know what that choice looks like, and I am hopeful that we can return to a place where we can have robust debates, but they can be based on the same set of facts, and that we don't target and villainize one another just because we don't see eye to eye. That's my goal, and that's what I'm working toward.
So it's time for us to wrap up, but I just wanted to say, this is a relatively small book, and we've been talking about it for an hour, but here's why you should still buy it. There's a lot of things in there we didn't talk about, but you should buy it to give it to every young person who's possibly going to be a leader, or a leader at school or at church, or wherever that person is trying to kind of stick their neck out a little bit. And read it for all of us as we go through this next moment in the campaign and make our voices heard. And it's a really beautiful book about someone who is not victimized, who has an outrageous sense of humor, who has used her position of leadership to listen and spread sanity and kindness and humor and actually do things for people. And I'm proud to be here to support it.
Such a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you to Ted and Mary.